Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, we have Bob Yapp. He's a preservationist, teacher, and consultant. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure, Daniel.
So tell me a little bit about your background.
Wow. Okay. Well, I am a Midwesterner, true and blue. I was born in St. Louis and raised in Des Moines, Iowa. My father was a corporate executive. My mother was a feminist writer, which was interesting. She was sort of a leftist, and my father was head of the Iowa Republican Party back in.
Oh my goodness!
And together they were some of the early founders of Planned Parenthood of Iowa. Together, both of them. So it's
that was more acceptable under the Republican Party then too.
Family planning was an idea. So anyway, so we always lived in these beautiful craftsman style home. The house I grew up in, especially red tile, Ludowici clay tile roof, balconies, brick. It was a great house. And my dad, being a corporate guy, was gone a lot. So when he would come home, he was an old house weekend warrior, and I would just do anything to go down in the shop with him. And when I was about 5 or 6, he said to me, we don't own this house. And I started crying, and I said, well, are we moving? I don't understand, Dad. And he said, no. You can go down to the county, and you can look it up, and we own the house there. But we don't own this house, and don't you ever forget it. It's our job to do quality work that lasts, so the next family can enjoy this house as much as we love it.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me. My mom was a writer, but she was also an antique dealer. So we were surrounded by classic homes and historic homes and that kind of thing. And so that was an inspiration. My senior year in high school, I had one of the biggest paper routes in Des Moines, and it saved up a whole bunch of money, almost 10 grand. I was bragging about it at the community theater because I was volunteering to help build sets. And a gay couple came up to me and said, listen, everybody's telling us San Francisco is a safe place for the gay community, so we're moving to San Francisco. And you have to remember, this is 1974.
Okay.
And so it was a long time ago. And you guys keep, you're bragging about all this money you saved up. Why don't you buy our house? And I'm like, I can't buy your house. I'm in high school.
Right.
And he's like, they're like, well, come out and look at it. So I drove up, and here's this little house overlooking a park called Union Park, which I later found out was dedicated by Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh.
And it had a tuck under garage with a cross-bucked door on it. It had a porch with casement windows overlooking the park and a little balcony above that. It was stucco on the first floor and cedar shingle on the second floor, and just had so much interest. And I went inside, and it had all this woodwork in it. They had like some sort of weird tiger striping in it, and brand new lime green shag carpet, and the plastic rake. And the plastic rake was going to get thrown in with the deal if I bought the house, right?
Oh my goodness.
And the kitchen cabinets were original pine, and they were in excellent condition. There was a built-in buffet in the dining room, and beam ceilings, and it looked like somebody took a hammer to the hardware and beat it all up.
Oh, yeah.
And, I just was enamored with it. So we go upstairs, we get into a little scuttle hole in the to get up into the attic, and there's a whole bunch of rolls of what looked like wallpaper over on the side of the attic.
Oh,
So
yeah.
they were all shocked. They didn't know that was up there. So we grabbed it, pulled it down, and we unrolled it, and it wasn't wallpaper. It was the original blueprints.
Oh, fun.
And when we unrolled it, a catalog fell out. And the catalog was Gustav Stickley's Craftsman Home.
Oh.
And the prints were actually signed by Gustav Stickley.
Oh my
They had
goodness.
ordered to build that. Yeah. So I'm like, who's this guy? Right? I'm 17 and preservation wasn't something I'd even heard of.
Right.
So but another buddy had a big paper out, and we're like, okay, so how do we buy this house since we're not even 18 years old? So let's sell it to you for $16,000. You give us $2,000 cash down, and you just till you get it. But that'll leave you $10,000 you guys have to put into the house, and you can sell it before you graduate. I'm like, cool. So
yeah, that sounds like a good deal.
All right. So we bought the house, and being a good Iowa boy, I called Pella to come out and give me a bid or all the windows. I called the aluminum siding company, because back then the wider your aluminum siding was, the groovier you were.
Well, that would go with your carpet.
Right, exactly, right. And then we were gonna got bids to replace the original cedar shingle roof was still on it.
Oh my goodness.
From 1906.
Yeah.
And it had some leaking by then. That was a pretty long roof.
That was.
Yeah. So we got a 3-tab shingle bid and all this. And we got all the bids together and put them on the floor, and they were almost $30,000.
Yeah.
And we were in shock. So we went over and looked at the windows, and the ropes were broken. The putty was falling out, but we lifted them up, and there was a secret trap door in the side of the jamb. And there were these weights inside. And so we went to the hardware store and bought rope and putty. And back then it was only DAP 33, which is just garbage.
Right.
Nobody
it
uses
is.
That. But and then to fix some rot, we went to an auto store and bought Bondo.
Oh my goodness! Did you get Bondo?
At that time, there was no architecture.
Yeah.
And there was no architectural epoxy in 1974 that was readily available for anybody.
Yeah.
So we just dolled up the house. We took out, we bought a 6-pack of beer. We pulled back the shag carpet. I spilled beer on the floor, and it started to melt the finish.
Oh my goodness.
Like, oh my God. It was so black you couldn't even see what we all know is white quarter sawn oak at the time.
Right. Yeah.
And we wiped it up, and all of a sudden you could see the beautiful floor. So we stripped the whole floor with alcohol that we got from the hardware store. Everything we did was pure preservation, and we really didn't really understand it. I'd gone to the library, and the only thing I could find was this guy named Clem Labine had this like 8-page 3-hole punch newsletter called the Old House Journal, and that was about it back in those days.
Well, and that was in the early days. Yeah.
Yeah. So and Clem became a friend over the years. He's a good man. So anyway, we got the house done. We called a realtor. Now remember, we paid $16,000 for it, and we had $10,000 in it, including the down payment and everything. And so that was like $26,000 we had in it. I called the realtor. I said, "Do you think you could sell it for $32,000?" She said, "No, we're going to put it on the market for $82,000."
Oh my goodness!
Sold the first day for $84,000.
Oh, that's and in the early 70s, that was a lot for a house.
It was huge. It was huge. It was a great house, and it had the people that bought it understood the provenance of Stickley and all.
Oh
that.
yeah.
So we go to the bank to close, and the banker says, "Guys, you're not old enough to sign deeds. You got to go get your parents." So we went outside, and we went, "Oh."
Oh no.
Because we never told our parents.
Oh my goodness.
So I go home, and you have to remember, my dad was like 6'9", and he was a corporate guy, big, gigantic, huge man. Dad, Mark and I bought this house over on the east side. He says, "You did what?" You little liar, you told your mother you were going to the library and studying and going to prom and all that stuff, and you're over on the east side of town. There's always that side of town, right?
Right.
Yeah, rehabbing some crappy old house. I stopped him and I said, we have 26 in it and we sold it for 84. And he stopped. He put his arm around me.
He was ready to be a believer.
And he said, "Why, what a fine capitalist boy you are." So that was my first house, and it's part of the reason I've never been into overall. I do special restoration projects like at George Washington's Mount Vernon home.
Right.
I did some work on a Japanese internment camp in Idaho for the National Park Service. I don't like to compete with the private market. So being a historic property developer, a true developer, one that doesn't have, if I'm doing tax credits, I have no issues whatsoever because I usually do more than what the state preservation office.
Yeah, you're not fighting with them to. Yeah.
No, it's not flipping. HGTV has bastardized.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so horribly.
Yeah.
So I then found an internationally known furniture maker named Robert Krebsbach and begged my way into a 4-year traditional German furniture making apprenticeship. And I did that. And then all the while buying historic houses and rehabbing them at night and on weekends. And so I did that for a while, and then I started being the architectural writer for the Des Moines Register, and then I started doing a syndicated column called The House Doctor, and then I started. What was really interesting was that I'm assuming you're still with me, right?
I am. I'm listening.
Because I can't see you anymore for some
Oh
reason.
no, you're okay. I can see you and I can hear you.
Okay. So anyway, the syndicator for the radio show, The House Doctor, we started doing a syndicated radio show. And it was getting very popular. I was on a lot of stations. And the syndicator said, you really should do a video because this is radio. Take the top 10 questions that people ask you and do a video. I said, I don't know anything about video. And I did that with my wife, Pat, who is the person who keeps me from being a homeless stew bum in an alley downtown. And so we did it, and then all of a sudden I get a call from PBS. We love your pilot, and we'd like you to come out to DC and talk about a national show. And I'm like, what pilot? I had no idea what they were talking about.
Right.
Said,
this was not your sizzle reel.
So it's unbelievable. I'm like, okay. So after I wet myself and changed my pants, I got on a plane and I went out to DC and ended up getting an agent and all this different stuff. And so we started the show in 1996, About Your House with Bob Yapp. Our primary underwriter was the National Trust for Historic Preservation. That's our very first underwriter. But even that was a little bit of a debate. There was a debate at the National Trust. Well, preservation is an exclusive club, and this guy's kind of a plain-spoken Midwestern guy. And so half the board was like, I don't think so. And the other half was like, yeah, we got to do this because if we don't get a practical preservationist like Bob and start really doing this, and this is Dick Moe speaking, who used to run the trust, the average old house owner is going to take preservation away from us if we don't franchise them into the process. And this is an opportunity for us to get in on the ground floor for that. Because this old house, God bless them, but it's always been $1 million fantasy show, and it didn't have a lot of application to the average old homeowner.
Right.
So our show was pure preservation. It's on YouTube now. I'm putting it all up there. I own the rights to the show, and it's About Your House with Bob Yapp channel. So people can go look at that. And the show did really well. And unbeknownst to me, PBS was doing Nielsen ratings. And I was getting 2 million 2 million plus people a week watching the show, which was, I was beating This Old House in the ratings, which really ticked them off, apparently. They're like, because I traveled all over the country. So if I was on a roof showing how a slate roof was being done in the Midwest, the next shot was me on a roof in Seattle, and the next shot after that was me in Cape Cod.
Right. So show, and that really does help to show the regional differences.
Right, and we were even able to talk about ranges and costs based on what area, you're going to be a percentage higher or whatever.
Yeah.
And in the YouTube, that now that we put them on YouTube, we've actually updated the pricing for.
Oh, have you? That's great.
Yeah. So that was interesting. So PBS happened, and we did that for 4 years. And in the end, one of our major underwriters came to us and said, this is the most amazing show, home improvement show we've ever sponsored. We sponsored This Old House. We sponsored Martha Stewart and all these other shows, and nobody has the ratings that you're getting, and the repeat watches and the reruns and all this. And I'm like, wow, I'm really glad you're happy. And they said, but there's a problem. And I said, what? Well, you're a preservation show. The guys at This Old House, they understand the sensibility of reaching out to the remodeling industry as well as the preservation. And I said, look, the show is underwritten primarily up front by the National Trust. It's a pure preservation show. It has been for 4 years. It's popular because of that, in my opinion.
Right. It's popular
and they
because
said,
it's different.
well, that's right. Yeah. And this big hardware company that was putting up half of the $2 million a year said, well, we need you to start promoting vinyl siding and vinyl windows on the show.
Oh, my goodness.
Half our dealers sell those products. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen.
No.
And I walked away. I walked away at the very height of the show.
Yeah.
And went out on the road and started doing hands-on workshops all over the country, sort of like a circuit rider, which I still do today.
Yeah, that was the right decision in my opinion, but it probably was not an easy decision. I would assume.
It was not an easy decision because I was getting to millions of viewers, and and that has a lot of value because I've never been in this for any other reason than I think it's the right thing to do.
Right. Well, and you're able to reach people that maybe didn't know there were other options. And that's a huge platform. And
start dispelling the myth that historic preservation is so expensive. You see, so Donovan Ripkema is a bud of mine, and he and I talk a lot. And so one of the things I took a look at was from a data standpoint, I just finished my 163rd restoration, an 1854 slave house here in Hannibal. And that's direct ownership, partnerships, project management, planning. I haven't owned every one of those, but and I went back and tracked. One of the things Don asked me at a conference where we were both speaking, he said, "You ever tracked how much labor went into these projects?" I said, "Well, I keep really great records. So I keep these school notebooks, probably 10 or 15 per project, and then all the accounting stuff." So it was a slow winter, and I went back through everything, and I'll be doggone. So 71.6% of all the costs of my rehabs have gone to labor.
I can believe that.
Well, and if you look at new construction, labor runs about 40%.
Yeah.
And so here we are, not using a lot of new materials compared to new construction, which just the energy used to make new materials far exceeds the energy that it costs to make historic materials.
Right.
So and the transportation costs and the pollution and all that kind of thing. And so the embodied energy in these houses is labor. So if you want to create jobs when times are down, you don't ramp down preservation, you ramp preservation up.
Right.
Which was a huge disappointment for me. I was a big supporter of Obama, but he was not a very preservation minded president.
Right.
And gave tax credits for putting in vinyl windows. He gave tax credits for cheesy aluminum storms. And we've did all the data and went to the Department of Energy and said, look, we have all the data to show this and that and this and that. And they still wouldn't do it. So it's interesting. So.
Yeah. And it's hard to, because I being home some this winter, in the middle of the day, and having the seeing the commercials for all the replacement window companies. If your windows are more than 10 years old, you need to replace them. I mean, it's really hard to work against that messaging that is just constant bombardment.
Right.
In 2000 process. Yeah.
In 2019, the replacement window industry was about a $9 billion industry. So you start to extrapolate that out, and being conservative, that's about 112 million window sashes in the dump every year.
Right.
And what's fascinating about that, and this has changed, this percentage has gotten higher and higher over the last 20 years, but it looks like about half of those, about 56 million of those windows, are less than 20 years old.
Oh, I can believe it. Yeah. I've seen some.
So,
yeah.
So let's replace our windows with something that doesn't last as long as high quality carpeting or a 3-tab shingled roof.
Right. Yeah. And keep replacing them so you're in that cycle.
That's right. And so the industry now, the window industry now understands this, and they have literally told the trade organizations, which I belong to, if they stopped.
If they check their list, maybe you should join under a different name.
But nobody's put a hit out on me yet that I'm. So they're encouraging window manufacturers, dealers, to market to a 15 to 20 year window as just normal everyday life.
That's just what it is. Yeah.
That's insanity.
It is.
That's one of the biggest consumer ripoffs in the history of home improvement.
And they're not and those are not the low end, because there's a whole range of replacement window options, and those aren't even the low end options that are doing that.
Well, one thing I have that has worked well is that I like I said at the beginning, I don't compete with the private market. I try to, because I do a lot of third-party consulting, and I give a lot of advice, and I teach. I have a school and all this, and I don't want to compete with my students and all that kind of thing. But I can't remember what my point was. But
that's okay.
yeah. Well, when you're 63, you have those moments. I guess maybe I shouldn't put lead dust in my cereal in the morning.
Oh no, yeah. I was so you mentioned your school. So I'm sure that you've probably had to cut back
I remember what it was.
Okay.
So because I don't compete, I have a good relationship with preservation contractors all over the country that do a variety of work, everything from historic roofing to windows to porch restoration, all these different types of things. Well, one of the biggest issues in communities across the country that have a preservation ordinance and a local where the people have to come and get what we typically call certificates of appropriateness, which I think the word appropriateness should be banned from preservation because it's too subjective. So I encourage all okey dokiness.
Right.
But I don't know. So anyway, what I've developed is the historic preservation cost comparison tool. The trust and the Park Service put up some money to do
very cool.
To do one in Kansas, and it went really well. And then they gave me permission to keep it. So I placed it in Colorado. I've got Pennsylvania's checked in with me about the possibility of doing it in their communities. And the idea is that I find a region that people are willing to work in around that. Like, take Harrisburg, for example.
Right.
To take the region that contractors are willing to come into that area from. If I were to do one there, then I would talk to them, and they would go, "Oh, it's you, Bob. Okay, you're not going to compete with us. I'm not going to out who you are with your pricing," but they're all willing to give me their pricing because they know that I'll protect them. And then I'm able to come up with an average of a range of what it will cost for any number of things, whether it's replacing or repairing for 3¼ inch tongue and groove porch decking,
Right.
as opposed to Trex materials, whether it's vinyl siding as opposed to painting,
Right.
whether it's window restoration as opposed to replacing windows, all these different aspects, as well as downtown main streets. So the bottom line is that in almost every single case, preservation costs less
Right.
than
Yeah.
and
Especially
people.
over the long run, if you're looking at the embodied energy and the longevity of the material and the
That's right.
yeah.
But I don't want to put us in a position where we're competing against something that's a false equivalency.
Right. I agree.
Because what we do is we repair things that have been in service for 100, 200 years sometimes,
Right.
for another 100 years. And that puts us at the head of the environmental movement.
I agree.
Literally, preservation created, without even knowing it, the environmental movement. And so we have all these organizations like the LEAD and all this kind of stuff, and what I want to say to these people is, yeah, whatever. Follow preservationists, and you will be the most environmentally sound organization that there is.
Right.
Get away from preservation, and we start to lose all the embodied energy. We start to lose everything, and it's just craziness. So.
Right. No, I agree. So you've talked some about the work you do. I'm sure you're not teaching in-person classes right now, or have you started again?
We start back up, believe it or not, on June 26th. We have
Okay.
Rhonda Deeg, Rhonda Deeg is a nationally known stained glass artist who's going to come in and teach a 3-day class on both making and restoring stained glass windows. I didn't know I had to cancel everything this spring.
Right.
And our bed and breakfast here, we have a 7-room bed and breakfast. We had like 72 cancellations in the spring. But it's funny, now things are starting to come back. Missouri is, never has believed in government. I can't believe I did. But Hannibal is a fabulous little town. And on the Mississippi River, we're all river rats, but people are signing up. So
Okay,
I have
very good.
the stained glass in June, but the July window preservation and weatherization boot camp is almost full, and that is my 2020 season starting at the end of June.
Okay. Very good. Very good. And we'll make sure we have links to that on our site when we post the podcast. So,
Yeah.
and I know you've kind of talked about your consulting. Is there anything else that you want to share about the work you do?
Well, I do a lot of different things. So I train historic preservation commissions. So I come in and that's what I did for the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I went with my mom because she was on the historic commission.
I do that. I do consulting. Right now I'm a project manager for the restoration of a clock tower on a county courthouse in Southern Illinois. I write all the existing conditions reports and then all the specifications for projects all over the country. Sometimes I get asked to do limited project management. This one in Illinois is close enough that I can run down there if I need to. So
right. And
that, so I do quite a bit of that. I do some special restoration projects, like I was saying earlier, and the school, and I do seminars, classroom seminars as well on a variety of everything you can think of in preservation. And I just do a whole bunch of different things. And when you're self-employed and you're in preservation, you better be diverse.
Right.
Because as things, when this all came down, COVID, I had several special restoration projects scheduled for the fall, and all of my traveling workshops and seminars got pushed to the fall. So I brought the special restoration projects up to now, just so we could stay busy and keep my and I have a full-time apprentice. I've always run an apprentice. I did an apprenticeship, and so I feel it's really important, and I kept him working, and so yeah.
Yeah, very, very good. And I think that apprenticeship model is the fact that in Europe they really have kept that going, I think that's something that the trades need to do.
Right, and they start to identify people when they're young. I
Right.
mean, some brilliant think tank in the late 60s, early 70s decided that everybody should go to a 4-year college.
Right.
And that's absolute insanity.
Yeah.
I mean, my mission has been to save the traditional artisan trades in this country in any way that I can, and to implore young people to get involved. When I got to Hannibal, I noticed that we bought this big, gigantic 8,000 square foot Italianate 1859 antebellum mansion that was slumlord apartment.
Oh goodness. Yeah.
And we start restoring it. And I noticed all these 14, 15-year-old kids walking the street during school. So I go out to the superintendent. I went out to the superintendent. I said, "What's up with that?" And she says, "Oh, Bob, this is Hannibal. Those are our Huck Finns."
Oh goodness.
So what does that mean? She said, "Well, they've all dropped out, or they're almost to the point of getting kicked out. They're in the juvie justice system. Their parents beat them. They come from those, girls are raped. I mean, it's all these horrible things.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do with them." And I said, "Well, that's some bull. I don't know if I can swear or not."
You can say what you want.
That's some bullshit," I said. And we're gonna. I just started up the Belvedere School for Hands-On Preservation here for adults from around the country. And I said, "You're gonna start bringing contract with me. You're gonna bring me all those kids. We're gonna get them back in school. You're gonna bring them to me in the morning on a bus, and then you're gonna pick them up around lunchtime, take them back for regular classes, and we're gonna teach them historic preservation trades, half girls, half boys." And they just said, instead of saying, "Well, here's why we can't, and here's why we can't," they said, we have to make this happen. This is perfect.
Yeah.
So in 6 years of that program, we graduated 160 kids that would have never graduated from high school.
Oh, that's great.
And taught them the trade. And some of them will go into it, some of them won't, but they'll know how to take care of it.
But they have a skill. They have a skill. Yeah.
So I've taken that model, and I set up historic preservation trades programs around the country as well. I do come in, identify the stakeholders. I work with the local people. I help write the curriculum. I help figure out what equipment and facilities and restoration of all that. It's a turnkey thing that can create a historic preservation program in just about any community.
Oh, that's really helping to keep the trades going and pass those skills along, which is very important. So what do you wish that you know now that you didn't know when you got started?
I wish I had understood just how much preservation represents environmental soundness. It didn't take me too long to figure it out, but I think that there are a lot of people in the business and a lot of people coming into the business that know it. And here's what's fascinating to me. I was one of the founders of the Window Preservation Collaborative, which does testing of windows and that kind of thing. And then I co-wrote and co-edited with John Leake the Window Standards book, which is being used by architects and SHPOs all over the country. And we had a window summit. We had a window summit, and about 60 to 80, I can't remember exactly, people showed up, and half of them were women. Yeah. And over half of the people that came were millennials. I was in tears because I have been working so hard all my life to try to make a dent in this and get younger people involved, and they are, and they're coming in droves. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah,
they're fantastic, and this is so sexist, but I got to tell you, when I train guys and women side by side, the women are way better than me.
my dad always said that too. He said that just more detail oriented. But
I don't know what it is, but I think it's also listening skills. I think it's listening. The guys that sign up for my classes, I say, rate yourself on a 1 to 5 basis, 5 being the most skilled, 0 being the least skilled.
Are they all 5s?
And the guys are all 4s and 5s. And the women will come in and go, I'm a 1 or 2, maybe a 3. And at the end of the class, the guys are like, oh gosh, Bob, maybe I was it too.
I have noticed that working in the industry for 20 years that that there are oftentimes men do inflate their skills.
Yeah, Allison Hardy founded
Oh,
the
she's great.
Window
Yeah.
Preservation Alliance. You just have, Catherine Brooks
Yes. Yeah.
is like one of the great promoters of preservation, and is a distributor for infrared heating devices from Sweden, which we all use now. And it's just there's just a lot of good things happening. It makes me very, very pleased, and I'm as active today as I've ever been. I was just next door putting up African mahogany beadboard on some walnut cabinets I made for this loft we're doing in a building. So I can't get away from it.
So do you, I guess you kind of talked about some of the things that you're seeing in preservation. Do you see any trends or challenges or do you feel like,
Well, I think our biggest challenge right now is, and it's been a challenge for me, it's something that I've tried to work with all my life, is to bring people of color into our movement more so, where they feel a sense of ownership in their communities. It was interesting. At one point in my life, I actually did political talk radio. And I was having a conversation about, and there aren't very many liberal talk radio shows.
There aren't.
I was one of them. And we're talking about Central City neighborhoods and turning them around. And a neurosurgeon, African-American neurosurgeon, called up the show and he said, "Look, Bob, we grew up in those neighborhoods and we're not moving back." And that was a moment for me. I'm like, okay, so how do we do this? But I think, with everything going on, Black lives do matter. And I think it's very, very important for people like me, who undeservedly constitute one of the most privileged class of human beings in the history of the world, which is white males, which is just completely ageist. And we that privilege by buying kidnapped people and abusing them and enslaving them, and it's just horrible. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's not just talk. We need to be sitting down with police departments and having conversations about this, about Central City neighborhoods and community policing, because turning them around is really important.
No,
and
Go ahead. It is. I agree with you, and that's something that we talked about when my parents retired a few years ago in the business, and we talked about how a lot of back to the apprenticeship, a lot of the trades were passed down to through families, but also I'm reading a book right now called Northern Slavery, or Slavery in the North, and they talked about most of the enslaved people in the North were very skilled tradespeople, but as soon as the abolitionists came in and freed them, then they said, you can't work in those trades anymore because we don't want you to compete with the white people.
Well, that's a fascinating thing. So Hannibal was a Confederate town.
Oh yes.
And of course, Mark Twain wrote all about it. And almost everything built before and during the Civil War in this community was built by artisan trades, enslaved people,
right,
and men specifically. And the population of Hannibal was like close to 30% enslaved people until the end of the Civil War, and then it went down to like 1%.
Right.
And I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, which is north of here about 4 hours. And Des Moines, which was an abolitionist community, very progressive for the time. And I grew up around all these African-American artists and tradespeople.
That's interesting.
And it's fascinating. And I'm like, so before I get out in the real world, I just assume that's the way it is in every community. Right. And it's not. And so we're starting to do some research to see if maybe some of these Hanniballians actually ended up in Des Moines. So yeah. Fascinating. And more and more people are coming in. Jim Turner was a former student of mine.
Oh yeah.
Who's a buddy, and he's really done really well in the business and really loves it, and has mentored a lot of young people, so that's good.
That's important, and it's important to have people that and I think just in general, we all need to recognize that we have this shared history, and once we start acknowledging all of it, then we can, move forward together rather than, just saying, oh, it wasn't me. We don't need to talk about this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah, it's all tied together in so many ways, and the preservation movement in America is one of the most unique movements in the history of this country. Really started out in the late 60s, early 70s in a significant way. I mean, the ladies restored George Washington's Mount Vernon in the mid 1800s. That was probably the first restoration of anything iconic that we knew of.
Right.
And it's an honor for me to work out there. But so preservation is a group of varying types of folks. Men, women, people of color are coming into it more and more, which is good. People that are conservative, people that are liberal, people that are moderate. And we all come together because we all understand that keeping our built environment is also teaching the history of who we are and where we came from.
Yeah. That's one of the other points in the book that I'm reading, is that a lot of the places where slavery occurred in the North were not either they're not acknowledged, they're still here, but they weren't acknowledged, or they weren't saved. And so therefore, there was this collective of not remembering, it was just in the South, but it wasn't. It was all throughout the whole country. And as a collective memory, if you don't have those places and those places don't stay, you do start to forget, because, the people who had direct experience are not here to tell us about it.
Well, and we have embraced, we've done as much research as humanly possible to find out about the slaves that lived here at our place, the Belvedere, and which is actually the Alfred Lamb House on the National Register. And we've named rooms after the slaves, but we only have their first names. So, it's like Henry's room, that kind of thing. But on the backs of the mantles, so the house was built in 1859, and there's the mantles are all sort of East Lake looking. So I thought, okay, somebody replaced them probably in the 80s. Not true. I took them off when we were restoring to get them reattached more properly, and they're signed on the back, Henry. 1859.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how can that be? So I go up in the attic and I find a magazine from England. It's sort of mouse-eaten.
Yeah.
But it has a dog-eared page. I open it up, and there's a little article with a couple of drawings of this young kid in England named Eastlake who was building some interesting things.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
So did Mr. Lamb get the magazine, give it to Henry? It's fascinating.
Yeah, there's a story there. Yeah, very good. Okay, well, is there anything else you wanted to share that we didn't have a chance to cover?
Well, I think, my motto has always been that preservation doesn't cost, it pays. It pays in so many ways. It pays in community. Look at the Main Street program, one of the most successful preservation-based programs in American history. The preservation movement has made some inroads. We need to do a better job of incorporating the average old house owner into the process. We need to continue trying to do that.
Right.
A lot of property rights people feel that preservation is a bunch of people that are going to take away their property.
Right.
But in truth, preservation creates property rights.
Yeah.
And by being in a local district, the slumlord next door can't remodel his house and ruin the value of your property, whether it's a small bungalow or a big robber baron mansion like the one. So I think that's important for everyone to remember. Preservation is for everyone. And gentrification is not something that happens outside of big cities. Throughout the country, there's more preservation going on in the Midwest than both coasts combined. And
really?
Well, people on the coast don't realize
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Preservation has been used since the early 70s in the Midwest as a way to turn neighborhoods around and embrace the small worker cottage and the retailer's house and the banker's house and the little grocery store in the corner, and not gentrify to the point, just get values to a reasonable level instead of
Right.
just, slumlord levels.
Right. Well,
So
and yeah.
it's doable.
Yeah. And you want to, yeah, I struggle with that gentrification idea too. Because, somebody was talking to me about it. I'm like, well, that's kind of how we make money. But I don't think it's bad for in every instance, because it does. If you need to raise the living standards of an area and allow people to not take advantage of other people, it's important. So
Well, and all these HUD programs, housing urban development programs and stuff, they basically disrespect working poor people.
they do
They say, you don't deserve to live around the
in a
beauty of
nice
the
house,
historic
right?
fabric. We're going to rip it all out and put in plastic windows and plastic siding and plastic floors and plastic
Right.
porches and all this kind of crap. And in fact, we can rehab historic worker houses that make wonderful homes for working poor families and make them as much a part of the neighborhood as anyone else. If we
Yeah.
tear down all the worker houses and build McMansions in these historic neighborhoods,
Yeah.
we are taking away the one reason I raise my kids in the central city neighborhoods is for the diversity, both ethnically and economically.
Right.
And it has benefited my children immensely to the point where they drive by every house with their kids and go, well, that's an early Tudor revival.
So, how can our listeners contact you?
Well, my email is yapperman, yapperman. I don't have a cape, but it's
Okay.
yapperman at MSN, yapperman at MSN.com. My website is bobyapp.com, BOBYAPP.com. And you can see all the classes at the Belvedere School on there and see all the different consulting things I do there. Our inn is the Belvedere Inn, and it is belvedereinhannibal.com.
Okay.
You can get my books, About Your House. It was my first book. You can get that on Amazon. You can get the window standards on Amazon. And that's basically how you get in touch.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I enjoyed our talk.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for doing this. It's so important.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.